He sat up in bed, stronger than ever. The room fell silent. The children who had once cried for him now stared in disbelief. Frank, the cold, greedy son, speechless. Cynthia, the glamorous influencer, mouth wide open, clutching her phone. And Rose, the only one with tears in her eyes, but for a different reason. "You failed the test," Mr. Harold Williams said, "and everything you ever wanted now belongs to someone else." This is the story of a 78-year-old self-made billionaire, a widower, a father, a man forgotten in his own home who faked his illness just to answer one question. If I lost everything tomorrow, who would still be here? Before we dive in, let us know in the comments where you're watching from, and hit subscribe so you don't miss the shocking end of this true story. Mr. Harold Williams was 78 years old, a self-made billionaire, a man who once built skyscrapers from dust, raised an empire from nothing but sweat and sleepless nights. He didn't inherit wealth, he earned it. Every dollar in his account, every acre of his land, every plaque with his name etched in gold, it all came from decades of sacrifice. But in the winter of his life, that empire no longer felt like an achievement. It felt heavy, cold, quiet. He lived alone in a sprawling estate just outside of Atlanta. Over 30 rooms, manicured gardens, imported chandeliers, rare paintings, but not a single voice echoing through the halls that meant something to him. His wife, Ellen, passed 10 years ago, cancer. Since then, the house had become a museum of memories. The grand staircase she used to dance on barefoot. The piano she played at night when he couldn't sleep. Now, silence. He had 3 children, but you wouldn't know it from the way they treated him. Frank was 40, a ruthless businessman who spoke like he was always in a board meeting. He visited his father only when contracts needed signatures or investment deals needed a legacy name. He called it checking in, but Harold knew it was just a polite term for sniffing around the estate. Cynthia, 38, was a socialite. Her life revolved around photo shoots, luxury handbags, and the constant pursuit of being seen. She once told a reporter that being a Williams means never having to worry about hard work. Harold never forgot that line. It stung more than any slap. Then there was Rose, the youngest, quiet, kind. A schoolteacher in a modest neighborhood far from the glamour her last name could afford. She never asked for anything. She didn't even live in the family home anymore. Harold offered, many times, but she insisted on renting her own apartment. "Dad," she once said, "I want to build something of my own, just like you did." She was his heart, but she was also distant, swallowed up by her own humble life. And lately, even she had stopped calling. Most nights, Harold sat alone in the study, a glass of whiskey in one hand, the other resting on old photo albums. Sometimes he would read her letters, Ellen's. Other times, he would write in a small leather diary that no one knew existed. One evening, he scribbled a sentence, then stared at it for nearly an hour. "If I lost everything tomorrow, who would still be here?" He looked around the room. Not one footstep, not one phone call, just the sound of a clock ticking above the fireplace, like a reminder that time, just like people, keeps moving, whether you matter or not. And that was when the idea first came to him, not as revenge, not even as a trick, but as a question, one that only life or death could answer. Mr. Harold Williams sat across from 2 of the only men he still trusted, Dr. Marcus Bell, his longtime physician, and Alan Decker, his personal attorney of over 25 years. These men had seen him at his highest and lowest, through the loss of his wife, the rise of his empire, and the slow unraveling of his family ties. What he was about to ask them wasn't illegal, but it wasn't ordinary either. "I need you to help me fake a terminal diagnosis," Harold said quietly. There was no tremble in his voice, no hesitation, just a deep, settled pain in his chest that had been building for years. Dr. Bell looked stunned at first, but he listened. Alan leaned forward, skeptical but curious. "Why?" Alan finally asked. Harold took a long breath. "Because I need to know who my children really are. I need to see who shows up for me, not for what I'm leaving behind." After a few days of careful planning, paperwork, and staged hospital scans, the story was ready. Harold Williams had just 6 months to live, diagnosed with a rare, fast-moving illness, the kind that couldn't be cured, the kind that steals your time before anyone's ready to say goodbye. The news was delivered in a private family meeting. The children were called to the estate under the impression there had been a sudden health scare. Frank arrived in a tailored suit, sunglasses still on inside. Cynthia walked in with a small film crew in tow. She had been vlogging from a yoga retreat in Palm Springs. Rose came in quietly, clutching a bag of home-baked muffins and wearing the same sweater her mother gave her years ago. The announcement hit like thunder. Tears, hugs, whispers of, "I'm so sorry, Dad." Promises to make time, to stay close, to be better. Frank offered to move some meetings to spend more weekends with him. Cynthia promised to document their remaining memories together. "Something raw and real," she said, already holding her phone at an angle. Rose didn't say much. She just hugged him tightly and whispered, "I don't know what I'd do without you." For a moment, Harold allowed himself to believe it had worked, that maybe his fears were wrong, that maybe the love he had longed for was still there, buried beneath years of distance, resentment, and misunderstanding. But within days, the truth started to seep through the cracks. Week 1 started with smiles that didn't reach the eyes. Frank suddenly began asking Alan, the family lawyer, curious little questions about stock options, board control, and how smooth a future leadership transition would be. He framed it as concern, of course. "Just looking out for the company, Dad." But Harold had known Frank long enough to hear the greed behind the grammar. Cynthia, ever the performer, began posting cryptic photos of herself in black sunglasses, captioned with phrases like "cherish every moment" and "family over everything," all while dressed in designer gowns posed by infinity pools. She never mentioned her father's name, just enough emotional bait to stir sympathy and engagement. Only Rose stayed the same. She didn't say much. She didn't post anything. She simply moved into the guest room across the hall, read to him at night, sat by his side in silence, reheated his food when it got cold, again and again. Week 2 brought colder winds. Frank, now bolder, began meeting privately with Alan. His voice echoed faintly through the study walls, words like majority vote, succession rights, and controlling interest tossed around like chess pieces. Cynthia disappeared entirely for what was labeled emotional healing in her next string of Instagram stories. The truth? She had flown to Paris for a spa retreat, one her father unknowingly paid for. She never called, not once that week. But Rose did more than call. She quit her teaching job, walked away from the only income she had to care for the father who once taught her how to ride a bike in the rain. She cleaned his room, cooked his meals, held his hand when his eyes welled with tears, not from pain, but from the deep, aching loneliness of being surrounded by family, yet entirely alone. The food got colder, the conversations shorter, the house lonelier. By week 3, the masks had fallen off completely. Harold lay motionless in bed one afternoon, pretending to be asleep. The door was slightly ajar. He heard footsteps, then whispers. Frank's voice, sharp and low. "When he's gone, I want full control. I earned it. I bled for that company while he played house with a chalkboard teacher." Then Cynthia's, almost laughing. "He'll leave me the beach house, I know it. He said I looked just like Mom the last time we were there. That's basically a promise, right?" Harold's eyes stayed closed, but his heart? It was wide open, every word carved into him like a blade. The children he had once bounced on his knee were now counting down the days until they could take what was his. It was a Thursday afternoon. A warm breeze slipped through the windows of the estate, brushing past the heavy curtains in Mr. Harold Williams' room. He had just finished pretending to nap, but his ears remained wide open. That's when he heard it, loud, unfiltered. Frank's voice carried through the hallway, sharp with frustration. "He's a burden now," Frank snapped. "We need that will updated, fast, before the estate gets stuck in probate or some emotional pity play happens. He's not even lucid half the time." Harold didn't move. He stared at the ceiling, letting the words sink into the cracks of his memory. Another betrayal, another confirmation. The next day, Cynthia arrived late in the afternoon. She didn't even stop by his room. Instead, she walked straight into the West Wing, trailing behind a man in a gray suit holding a clipboard. "No, don't worry," she whispered to the agent, unaware of the intercom still transmitting to the master bedroom. "He won't be around much longer. Just measure the main hallway and guest suites. I want to see if we can add a gallery room. I want it to be light and airy." That evening, Harold sat in his study with his old journal in front of him. The pen in his hand trembled, not from age, but from heartbreak. "I built this legacy from nothing," he wrote, "and now I see who you really are." He didn't cry. He didn't scream. He simply looked across the room at a faded picture of Ellen smiling in the garden she planted herself, and for the first time in weeks, he felt clarity. Alan, the lawyer, arrived that weekend with Dr. Bell for a wellness check. Harold sat them down, told them he was done observing, done waiting. "You still have control," Alan reminded him gently. "What will you do?" Harold looked down at the folder in front of him, his estate plans, untouched for years. Then he looked out the window, where Rose was helping the gardener lift flower pots Ellen once arranged herself. "I'm going to make sure everything ends up where it truly belongs." That night, under full confidentiality, the will was rewritten. Every business share, every property deed, every account, bond, and vehicle title, left to one person, Rose, the daughter who gave up everything when she thought he had nothing left to give.
The final week had arrived, or so they believed. Frank flew in from New York wearing a black tie and bringing 2 assistants, as if mourning was something to be scheduled. Cynthia arrived in a silk robe and oversized sunglasses, documenting her last week with Dad through a series of carefully filtered posts. Rose, as always, came quietly. No cameras, no makeup, just a warm blanket and a book of her father's favorite poems. The mansion filled with the low hum of false sorrow. Hugs were exchanged, but they felt hollow. Tears were wiped, but rarely shed. Every gesture rehearsed, every glance tinged with anticipation. They all thought this was the moment they'd say goodbye and begin their lives as heirs. But then, everything changed. On a calm Sunday morning in the middle of their final visit, Harold shifted in his bed, slowly, deliberately. He sat up, fully, eyes clear, shoulders straight, voice unwavering. The room fell still. Cynthia dropped her phone. Her face turned white. And then she fainted, collapsing into the arms of a stunned housemaid. Frank jumped up, shouting, "What is this? What kind of sick joke is this?" Rose stared, confused, silent, and trembling. Harold looked at each of them, calm, unshaken. And then he spoke. "The test is over," he said, "and only one of you passed." He turned to Rose. "You gave up your world to be in mine. You never asked for anything, but you gave me everything." Then his voice hardened. "Everything, the company, the mansion, the legacy, goes to Rose." He turned back to Frank and Cynthia, his eyes cold. "The rest of you, you can leave now." There was no screaming after that, just silence. Heavy, bitter silence. Frank clenched his fists. Cynthia finally opened her eyes, then looked around as if waking from a nightmare she couldn't control. And Rose covered her mouth with both hands. She wasn't smiling, she was crying. Not because she won, but because she hadn't expected anything at all.
Frank tried to fight it. Within weeks of the reveal, he dragged the matter to court, demanding a review of his father's mental capacity, accusing Rose of manipulation, even alleging that the will had been forged. But Alan Decker had prepared everything legally, meticulously, with witness statements, dated records, and medical clearances. Frank's case fell apart in less than a month. He left the courthouse red-faced, surrounded by reporters, refusing to answer a single question. It was the last time anyone saw him in public. Cynthia, humiliated by the exposure and buried under a storm of online backlash, quietly deleted her social media accounts. No farewell posts, no public statement. She cut off contact with both Harold and Rose, retreating into silence. No one knows where she lives now. Rose, on the other hand, chose to honor the gift, not with luxury, but with purpose. She created the Ellen Harold Williams Foundation, a charity focused on education and single-parent support. She used the estate's funds to build libraries, restore schools, and provide scholarships for children with dreams bigger than their zip codes. Her first donation? A brand-new school wing named after her mother. As for Harold, now healthy, free, and finally at peace, he travels often. Not to escape, but to live. To experience the parts of life he once missed while chasing success. And everywhere he goes, Rose goes with him. They walk cobblestone streets in Europe, sip coffee in quiet towns, visit the neighborhoods where he once struggled, sharing stories and laughter like two old friends who made it out the other side. And sometimes, late at night, he still writes in his journal. But now, the pages are filled with gratitude, not grief. Sometimes the truth doesn't come from words, but from silence. And in that silence, Harold found what he was looking for all along: real love. Would you have passed his test? Tell us in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more powerful stories like this.